The type of content we all produce and consume must evolve. It's highly unlikely that you or I are gonna digest 2,000 word blogs or 2,000 word ebooks on a phone. The type of content I'm gonna consume on a mobile device is gonna be short videos, audio podcasts, people that come to your website, especially with cookies going away. They're anonymous. You don't know who they are. So when you talk about marketing to the 95, our focus in marketing has become, how do you produce content that's so good that people are willing to pay for it?
Creating content so good that people would pay for it. How do you define that?
The way to do that is
Hey Pete, welcome to the show. I'm excited to dive in today on your two things specifically, because I know you've got a lot of thoughts around this. Number one, your thoughts on content marketing 2.0 in B2B. So content marketing 1.0 being creating content for primarily and almost entirely for search engines. And then content marketing 2.0, creating content mostly for social and content platforms, LinkedIn, YouTube, podcasting, newsletters, things like that. And just like your thinking around that modern content marketing, strategy today. And then secondly, what you all are doing at Pathfactory, to sort of lean into that. I know you had a post recently about a change you all made to your content strategy and an update to it. And it sounds like it's been going really well. So yeah, just for a little bit of context though, that I can share for everybody. You're the VP of marketing at Pathfactory. So Pathfactory is a content AI platform that essentially can personalize content experiences to individual specific buyers and then give you the analytics around what is actually happening with your content, specifically with that person and with individual, groups of folks from an ABM perspective that you're targeting. So you all are deep in the content game, in general.
very deep.
And yeah, maybe to start, like if we could kind of just, get an overview of maybe the broadest buckets of like how you think about maybe your marketing philosophy at Pathfactory in general, with the 5% of those who are in market actively searching for a solution like Pathfactory, maybe, going to Google, going to listing sites or review sites, things like that, and your prioritization of those folks versus your marketing that's like meant to build trust with future buyers who aren't necessarily in market yet. Like, how do you think about the differences between those and how you're approaching it?
Yeah, so I like to start off by saying that the way I buy today has evolved. And that's just, I translate how to think about my approach to marketing based on just my own experiences. And in its simplest form today, like whether I'm looking to buy a car or a TV, or in this case, B2B software or tech or whatever it might be, I typically start with reaching out to people I know, right? Or going into communities that I'm a part of, or going to a social platform that I'm on. And I either search looking for posts or comments or ads tied to things I'm referencing, or I reach out to friends. So I might reach out to someone like a Tano Denardi or Nick Bennett or whoever it might be and be like, hey, I'm looking at X or I'm thinking about Y. Do you have any experience or do you know anyone I can talk to for that? So just based on that own experience, and then I couple that with, I've worked in both large enterprises as well as startups. And in both experiences, what I've seen firsthand is the rise of, what a lot of us now refer to as like the anonymous buyer, right? So as we enter this cookieless world, or as cookies start to diminish more and more, coupled with the rise of mobile content consumption, right? Or all of us are consuming more content using mobile devices. It's forced really a few different trends, right? One is the type of content we all produce and consume must evolve. It's highly unlikely that you or I, Erik, are going to digest 2,000 word blogs or 2,000 word ebooks or white papers on a phone, right? My phone's like 5 or 6 and just it's just not going to happen. Now, some people maybe if you're in an airport or on a plane, sure. But in most cases, the likelihood of the type of content I'm going to consume on a mobile device is going to be different types of formats, short videos, maybe audio podcasts, things like that, right? Typically, mobile, think like on the go. That's just how I've referred to it. And a lot of the customer data we see ties into that. You couple that with, as well as when you look at a website, right? As you know, there's all this debate online about gating content or not gating content. At the end of the day, um, what you and I or other marketers experience is people that come to your website, oftentimes, especially with cookies going away or diminishing, they're anonymous. You don't know who they are. So when you talk about marketing to the 95, et cetera, our focus in marketing has become, especially at Pathfactory, but in all my stops more recently, it's how do I put out content that's valuable. And I'm going to credit Udi here because I was on a podcast with him recently. But Udi said something that has resonated with me, which is how do you produce content that's so good that people are willing to pay for it? And I'm probably going to cite that over and over again, and kudos and credit to Udi. But in my mind, our objective at Pathfactory when we produce content is how do we produce something that has, in essence, that idea of being so good at someone to pay for it. But in our mind, the way to do that is to inject points of view, interviews, examples of our customers, right? Maybe podcast stops. Like, how do we become a central point or central place for someone to come to get education or insight around how to best use content or how to best do X or Y? And that's what builds that trusted kind of resource. So you might think of that as like TMZ has found a creative and unique way to summarize, I guess you would say, like pop culture or what's happening to famous people. Right. And really at its core, if you look at what TMZ is, it's just really like a simple, centralized place that summarizes things that are happening to celebrities. Right. Like in its simplest form, that's what it is. Now they have creative, entertaining hooks around how they do that. Right. And they take strong points of view, and you know, there's other sites that maybe more aggressively go into that or make more satire type content around it. But in my mind, and like what we try to do at Pathfactory, and like one of the big pivots we made is when we look at content consumption trends, and that's one of the advantages I have working at a company like Pathfactory now. We've seen things like ebook time consumption's down. Well, why is that? Because so often or not, like the example I like to use is if you go to a search engine right now and type in ABM ebooks, you're going to get dozens. And they all kind of, Erik, say the same thing. And I'm not discrediting any of them. They all have different value and then usually that ebook pitches you a solution. In my mind, like when I sit down with our content team at Pathfactory, my point is like, if we're going to produce a playbook, an ebook on ABM, how do we produce something that's better and different from all the other ABM ebooks that are there? So for example, we might say, we're going to go interview 5 B2B marketers who are exceptional at ABM, or at least we perceive to be really good at ABM. And part of that's going to be injecting their insights and their unique experiences. So it's almost like if you read this ebook, you're going to get the pitfalls, the learning, and the success from these amazing ABM marketers who have been there and done that. Versus it's like, here's this MarTech company's point of view on how to best do ABM. And more than likely, it's the same checklist or things that MarTech company B is saying. And it doesn't discredit there's value in that. But and why I think this is also important, is my last point here, is with the rise of AI, right? And AI being used for content generation and content generation, when you inject personal examples or stories into the content you're producing, it's hard to replicate and it's hard to clone, and it's more human. So in its simplest form, the way we look at it, the way I look at it, the way I'm trying to drive marketing at Pathfactory is how do we produce content that's so good that people are going to pay for it? That's sort of like premise one for us. And my team's sick of me saying that, but I absolutely love that. And more importantly, it's how do we inject proprietary data or unique insights, podcasts like this or interviews that we're doing where we take snippets of stuff and inject that and become a central resource for people to be able to learn and get value out of what we're putting out there. And I think the last piece here, how I think about content nowadays, is creation's one part of it. Distribution is just as important and maybe more important, right? You could produce the best content in the world, but if no one sees it, it doesn't mean anything. So for us, it's also spending time to understand where your customers are or where your prospects are, where they spend time. I'm very bullish that channels like LinkedIn or social platforms in general, we're all there. Just some of us maybe more than others. And it's how do you distribute that content on that channel that matches the channels that people are on. But for us, channels like LinkedIn have become essential. And now our big focus is, my last point, kind of that how we think about it is creating momentum in marketing is super difficult. And once you've got it, how do you maintain it? So for us, it's like our focus for the first 6 months I was at Pathfactory is how do we start to build and get momentum? And now our focus is every month, we want to at least put out one thing that helps us stay relevant and helps us maintain momentum that we have, or at least it feels like we have. And if you're sitting there going like, how do you feel or measure that? We look at things like our inbound lead trends. And when inbound leads are saying they heard from us from LinkedIn or from communities or from word of mouth, that's a sign to us, even if we look at nothing else, content consumption, organic engagement, etc. If I simply look at that as a trend and seeing that go up, that's a sign like our distribution strategy is working. The content we're putting out is getting eyeballs. People are citing it and referencing it on sales calls. We're starting to see that stuff referenced. Simply put, even without fancy attribution software, even if you don't buy a tool like Pathfactory, you can still get to those insights by just looking at those trends, talking to customers, asking them where they heard about you. And for us, we're seeing more and more things like LinkedIn come up. And for me, that's like the holy grail. So I don't know if that directly answers it, but that's how I think
That
about it.
was
That's how we're approaching it. And it's
that
working well for us.
that was killer. There's a lot we could go into of different steps on each of those. I really love the premise of creating content so good that people would pay for it as well. How do you define that? Or how do you know that you have done that? In your opinion, that it is the content, it meets a certain quality standard that would meet the definition of so good people would buy it.
Yeah. So trial and error for us right now. I'm not going to sit here and say I have the best answer, but I think of it in a few buckets. Bucket one is because we're using social channels as a primary distribution measure, as we share and put snippets or links to the actual report, we're monitoring the comments and we're monitoring the engagement that those posts are getting. And when I see comments like, hey, Erik, this episode was great, more of this, or like, hey, when are you doing X, Y, or Z? Or hey, can you release the healthcare version of this report? That's a sign like there's some stickiness here, right? And people are spending time with it. That's one bucket that we're using. And again, we're experimenting, trial and error. Another bucket is obviously I have the advantage of being able to see content consumption trends. So, for example, when we released our benchmark report, I can tell you in the first 2 weeks, I'm actually looking at it, we had 4,000 content views in 2 weeks of just predominantly distributing that content via social platforms like LinkedIn and email. We had an average engagement time on that benchmark report of over 5.5 minutes. And then I have a breakdown of like how it's doing. Now, if you don't have tools like Pathfactory, you can use tools like Google Analytics. The free version, set up a page, look at time on page, look at engagement. You can even look at how that traffic is referring to. It's not perfect, but that's another way you can start to look at that level of engagement. And for me, Erik, looking at engagement time or consumption time, depending on the content format, is the most important metric. I care less about, hey, did it have 20,000 views, right? Like, so of course, like content creator like Mr. Beast will get 100 million views on a video. He's going to base it on, but I know like if you watch Mr. Beast interviews, he cares more about the engagement times and the drop offs, right? And what he's proven is, and I think the way the YouTube algorithm rewards creators is the more time someone spends, and then versing off the drop off times, that's how they reward and that's the payout. And that's what he optimizes content for. For us, I think of it very similar. It's if we have a video that we're posting, we're looking at how often did people view the full video, where are they dropping off, and how do we maximize that? So another example would be we just released a product tour. So we released a new product, we announced it. The tour had thousands of engagements in the first few weeks, which is exciting. I can tell you the tour had an average engagement time of 15 minutes, which is shocking to me. And by the way, we're not using our own tool to measure that. We're using a different tool to measure that. Um, and what I'm most interested in is where is that drop off happening, right? So now we're trying to optimize around those drop off times, et cetera. So that's another bucket of how we're using it. I think the third is I simply just call and ask. So I have influencers, I have friends, um, we have advisors. So as we're producing, we're starting to analyze stuff. We ship versions of stuff out to people. We ask for their feedback. We ask for their thoughts. Even the benchmark report we put out, we knew it wasn't perfect. There was data points and different things I'd love to be able to get to. But I also, Eric, have the mindset of like ship, and
Yeah.
we'll learn and we'll adjust as we go. But we're doing our best to try to get feedback or validity ahead of time to either alter our analysis or dig deeper into parts that maybe we're not seeing ourselves, and at a minimum to give us some of that, um, if you will, VOC, like voice of
Yep.
customer, if maybe not the right words, but just try to get some validity that, hey, like this is good, or I like this, or think about this before we produce things. So it's really that combination of things. But at the end of the day, I think when you're doing it well, particularly in communities and in social channels, you see it getting shared. And you hear people referencing it. And for me, like the mecca, like I said earlier, the holy grail for me, and when I know I'm hitting it, is when people are referencing it when they come in as an inbound lead, or they reference it on a sales call, or you get a message that's like, hey, this is being shared in the Slack channel, right? Or you go to LinkedIn and you see people citing your report or citing your video being like, hey, I just read Pathfactory's benchmark report. Here's my takeaways. What do you think? Like, all right, I don't think I need to tell anyone here that might be listening. Like that's the holy grail, right? So that's
Yeah.
how
And
I'll leave
there's,
it.
yeah, that's so good. I agree with all of that. And the beautiful thing about that is a self-reinforcing sort of flywheel. So like the more feedback you get, the more you can be sure that the content is working, but also it's helping guide you to what to create next because you will hear from the audience directly what pieces are resonating more, what parts of that are resonating more. And so that feedback loop, like honestly, is like the gold of everything, really. It's like because otherwise you're sort of like creating what you think the audience wants. And you can obviously, like you said, get on calls with folks and like ask them directly to get that. But like even better, you know, people are and if somebody's commenting that on LinkedIn or inbound DMing or sharing a Slack channel and you like and you see and hear that, that's just actually a tiny fraction of that happening that you can see.
Correct.
And so even just seeing, you know, whatever percentage of that is, there's a markup on how much of that is happening on top of that that you can't see. Because most people they're being influenced or they're taking action on stuff, but they're not necessarily commenting it on social or like really
Mhm.
showing you that. It's very similar to like podcast hosts who have built up some notoriety. If they go to like you can see in your dashboard and your analytics like the numbers, but you're not it's like kind of hard to get feedback for a podcast sometimes because it's like just the medium itself is like more one way than bi-directional. But so often we hear like if the host goes to industry conferences, they will have dozens and dozens and dozens of people come up to them saying like, I love your show. I love your show. Oh, you're the host of, I listen to that show all the time. And like the boots on the street, you know, kind of feedback can actually give
Yeah,
you a really good sense of what's going on.
totally agree. I think there's simple measurements too, right? You can look at overall traffic to your site, and is
Yep.
that growing? In theory, if you're doing a better job of building demand and trust with the larger audience and not maybe just the people that we would say are in market,
Yep.
then in theory, over time, traffic to your site should go up. Traffic to high value pages, whether that's your homepage or a demo page or pricing page, should go up.
Yep.
Right? Then you can look at if you have Google Analytics or you have content intelligence tools like a Pathfactory, you can be able to look at certain content engagement metrics. At a minimum, like our scorecard in marketing, I keep very simple. I look at inbound lead volume and where inbound leads are coming from by, how did you hear about us on the forum or asking that question on calls?
Yep.
And we look at pipeline creation. We don't filter by marketing and sales. And
Yep.
in theory, if I'm doing my job well in marketing, those two things trend up.
Yep.
That's it. I keep it literally. Now, obviously, we look at close one and things of that nature too. But there was a time earlier in my career where the marketing dashboards and scorecard was so complex, and we were looking at 100,000 different things, and it was, and as probably many of us know, especially if you're listening to this, there's ways, depending on what your goals are, to game the system, right? So I can run content syndication programs. Not to say that content syndication doesn't have a place, because even that strategy, if you have really good content, there could be an argument to be had to use that as a way to get your content in front of new buyers. I just think there's a downside of syndication too, which is when you're using it as just a way to build your database and spam people, right? But if you have really valuable content and you're using syndication partners as a way to get that content in front of the right buyers, I think there's absolutely a place for that in some strategies, as an example, right? And then you also asked, like, how do you know you're creating valuable content? To me, it goes back to, as well, how do you inject unique points of view or things that can't be copied, right? It's keep it that simple. If I'm doing the same type of one-to-one interviews with the same B2B marketers or CTOs or CIOs as everyone else, and where I'm asking the same questions, no one's going to care, right? At some point, it just becomes regurgitated content. And I have this running joke with some friends right now. It's just like, I don't want to do another podcast where it's just one-to-one, getting someone's story and how they built marketing or sales at company X. Like, no disrespect to those shows or events. It's just, for me, it's kind of tired. I would rather get a panel together and do teardowns of like things that are working, things that didn't work. And how do I teach people to be able to do things in a better, more efficient way based off the trial and errors of others? Like, that's the type of content I crave. And like, the way I try to approach this is, there was a time in my career where I would just survey people, right? I'd create a survey, especially in bigger companies. I'd survey out the customers and I might get 10 responses. And it's like the survey was almost like gamed towards the types of answers I wanted you to give me. And then I would produce the content based on that. And listen, there was a period in my career where I wrote tons of blogs, ebooks, white papers, syndicated that, gated it, and drove thousands and thousands of MQLs and crushed my dashboard. Now, if I'm not sure, the simplest thing I do is one of two things. I call friends, if they're my persona, et cetera, or I'll pick up the phone, I call customers. And I start to ask, like, where do you spend time? What type of content would you find valuable? Or what do you consume today? What type of topics? What are your pains? And then I start to build hypotheses. And then, like, for me, it's trial and error from there. It's, for the team and I, it's ship. And we start to see, and then we'll adjust. So like, when we started shipping benchmark reports or various versions of benchmark reports, like, we started with our cybersecurity report this year. So a smaller version of the bigger report we just released. And what we saw early on was that report had a 5-minute engagement time. When we were promoting it on via paid and organic on LinkedIn, the paid ads were outperforming the organic ads in terms of impression share and consumption time, which was surprising at first.
Yeah.
And then we were turning some of those posts into thought leadership ads and seeing those engagement metrics. I think we had like a 2.5% engagement on the thought leadership ads with named accounts. And we saw like a 30% lift via LinkedIn ads with our named account approach. So for me, like, that's showing the type of engagement I want for that targeted audience of cybersecurity buyers with a report that was geared towards cybersecurity. And I was getting feedback, like I was seeing comments, and we were seeing notes from reps being like, hey, I sent this to this prospect. Here's their feedback. Like, keep it coming. Like, you guys are killing it, or whatever. Like, I didn't need any more feedback at that point. Like, is the report perfect? No. Could it have more analysis? Sure. Like, I could sit here and pick apart everything I've probably produced. I'm also a perfectionist, so it's a problem. But that's how I know I'm on the right track. So now, like, my team and I sit down and go, like, how do we turn this into other content formats? Can I turn it into snippets? Things like that. And now the bigger question for us is, the number one question I'm trying to solve for right now is, how do I maintain consistency and momentum for the audience? So we sort of release things as we have it, but it's not consistent. So I have a solution for it, which we could maybe talk about in a bit, but we're going to release a new content approach very shortly where there will be consistency with what we're producing. And there's a vision for the type of quality that we're aiming for. So now we still do all the things we're doing, like benchmark, or like, so if you think about our content pillars, we have insight-led content. That's our benchmark reports and our customer insight data. We have content that we are still producing content for SEO, but it's very bottom of the funnel produced. I'll come to the other thing we're doing here in a second. We have a pillar of product tours and customer playbooks. So it's how do we show what the product does, as well as give examples of how customers are able to achieve that success. Because like my struggle with case studies is they cite big stats. But like if you want to create content so valuable people will pay for it, the value of a case study isn't so much Erik achieved 100% ROI increase. It's like, what did Erik do with that platform to be able to achieve that? So then I can look at that and say, here's how I can replicate it. But in actuality, most case studies don't do that, right? So that's how we're starting to reimagine case studies. And then I guess I'll go to it. The last pillar we have is we're about to launch a bi-weekly live event series.
Love it.
And the idea here is we'll have a panel of experts, sometimes customers, sometimes just influencers or thought leaders. And every 2 weeks, we're going to tear down different topics relative to B2B marketing or other trends in the world. Like our first one's actually going to be ironically on LinkedIn because that's a channel that we're spending a lot of time on right now. And our approach is different, right? So what our objective is, how do we teach marketers about things that people are learning on LinkedIn, failures, things that have worked, things that haven't. So you have real takeaways. And the idea here is even if Erik, like I remember when I presented this idea to the executive team, they're like, well, one's if no one attends. I'm like, I don't care.
Exactly.
Even if no one attends in the beginning, there's still value in the content. And then how do I take that content? Because this will be a video and audio format. How do I take that content, stitch it up into different formats, and then use that as thought leadership ads, use it as paid ads, use it as organic posts, use it as communications to our customers. So these are the content kind of pillars that we're betting on. The value of this approach is now I can have different levers where I can maintain momentum with my audience.
Yes.
I have a way to feed things like newsletters or giving value back to my customer. So like now when I email a customer, I can give them things of value. And when I email a prospect, it's not me just saying, hey, I want to propose you on a first date. Will you take a meeting with me? It's, hey, Erik, check out these 3 things we have that, we tore down these things. We think you'll find it useful. And like, hey, we're here if you ever want to talk or you want to learn more about how we can help you do X, Y, or Z, right? Like giving them value and insight without having to like hard pitch you. That has been our vision. That's the best we're making. And honestly, I'm pretty excited, but it's been a few months of evolution and trial and error to get to kind of where we're headed right now.
Totally. I mean, you have to start where you did, which is the audience insights first to that, and then start stacking on the content pillars. Cause like I'm a big believer in perfecting one as close to as possible and then layering on the next one versus like, even with platforms like social platforms, you're like dominating 1 or 2 versus like doing 5 at the same time. I really think the momentum piece you touched on and what you're going to launch now with the biweekly live series is very smart, because what we have found too is like series-based content gives non-followers a reason to follow. And so that consistent, like that's the actual through line of the conversion to follower and the consistent, what the momentum and consistency creates when it's wrapped under a series-based format that they can easily put in a bucket of like, oh, on the next installment, on the next episode, I want to make sure I don't miss that. So I need to hit follow or subscribe or sign up for the email list so I can make sure I'm on all of the invites for it and stuff like that. So that's a really, really great approach for that. What have you found with LinkedIn? So your first, it sounds like your first session is going to be on LinkedIn. I know you're doing a lot of work in general on LinkedIn. What are some things that you're seeing working? Obviously, whether that be the paid side, paid on top of organic with thought leader ads. Are you using personal brand accounts from the company versus the company page? Like what you're seeing really working with LinkedIn in general right now?
Yeah. So I think, lessons learned, if you will, so far online is we initially started with ads. So we created, and Ken, I still remember this. I pinged our demand leader who recently just started at Pathfactory and said like, hey, we need to stand up. Here's a named account list. We need to stand up an ad strategy. And I ideally want, at least a 50-50 ad split where 50% of the ads are focused on how do we give value. And occasionally, as we're giving value or trying to teach things, how do we occasionally plop in product overview type stuff without any type of hard sell? And then no more than 50% of those ads would be conversion oriented, right? How do I ultimately get them to become a lead, if you will, or demo request or whatever? And truthfully, within like a week, we launched a series of, I want to say it was roughly probably about 10 ads. And I'll get into some of the learnings here in a second. But, early on, we saw encouraging engagement metrics. So I think I referenced earlier, we've seen I think it's 30% of our named account list engages with at least 3 ads regularly for us. That's great. Like that's way better than I thought it would be. Our struggle has been, how do you keep ads frequently updated and relevant? That's an ongoing lesson and experiment for us. That is not as easy as it might seem for us, at least. So work in progress. We also, I think we'll get into structure in a second, but we brought in a resource to help us manage some of this. So, we're an internal marketing team of, pre Uber Flip acquisition, we were 5. Now we're 7 with the acquisition. But we strategically outsource certain things to bring in expertise and supplement our team. And one of them areas is our Google AdWord and LinkedIn strategy. So if you were to think about, if we had $10, we put about $2 to AdWords and we put the other 8 towards LinkedIn. And that's intentional. We just look at LinkedIn as the big bet and the key content distribution channel. From an ad perspective, I will say like the early engagement metrics, like I said earlier, anytime we share insight-led content via ads, it always exceeds the consumption of organic posts, at least for us so far. But that's another lesson. That kind of goes into another major bucket, which is organically, we haven't been consistent with having executives or leaders, as well as just our overall employee base posting. We are starting to try to make more conscious efforts of it. But our logic is, our goal going forward is at least maybe once a month, we try to get key people within the company posting. But if we're going to post, we want something at a minimum that's compelling, reasonable, people would find valuable. Is it a perfect model? No. Is it as good as you, Erik, or others who are consistently posting every day? No. But, I think a personal lesson I've had with LinkedIn, and ongoing struggle, and what we struggle with is, what do you post? What do you have to say? Right now, I've kept it simple with the team, which is at least once a month, if we can have something of value that we could put out there, like this bi-weekly live event show where we share recordings or snippets, or we share an insight-led content report as examples, that's a good start. That's a good place to start. And that's how we're approaching our organic strategy right now. The vision we have for organic long-term is to try to get more consistent and have, ideally, myself, since we market to marketers, our CEO and some of our other executives posting more regularly, and then having employees post like once a month. That's sort of like the long-term plan. We're just not quite at that maturity level yet. And that's okay. Like, we're using ads to supplement what we're doing. Kind of the other bucket that we're learning is influencers can be huge. So I'm going to credit Natalie at Nevadic. She's one of the brands I absolutely love. And I don't know if you've spoken to Natalie yet, but Natalie's fantastic. And Natalie built a program where she leverages what she calls advisors, which other brands might refer to as influencers. And like when they produce insight-led reports, for example, they share that with their advisors. They give feedback on those reports. And then she's adjusting the analysis, or she's adjusting the content based on that feedback. She's also using them as a distribution channel. We've started doing something similar. We're still in the early phases of it. But influencers, like when we launched our one of our big announcements in the last few months, our influencer strategy, which we leveraged, I think 10, if I recall, 10 influencers. I think we had something like 100,000 total impressions. We didn't go after big names, right? We used just niche, good reach into the audiences we cared about. we had something like 100,000 organic impressions from those influencers. We were able to track through UTM codes what those reaches were in terms of content reach and content consumption. And, for very minimal spend, right? We want to incent them to do it. The additional reach gained is sort of like content syndication. It was just a strategy of using them, as a one-time type of strategy just to get what we thought was valuable key content in front of buyers. So that's something we're experimenting with. And what we're also now experimenting with is taking those influencer posts and using them as thought leader ads. Those are some of the things we're starting to learn. But really the big thing here is we've seen the value of LinkedIn. And the real value we've seen is we're now seeing more and more inbound leads come in saying, we heard of Pathfactory from LinkedIn, or we saw and learned about certain things about Pathfactory from your LinkedIn ads or from your LinkedIn content. And you supplement that with actual LinkedIn inbound demo leads that we're generating, where some of those ads are demo related in, conversion points. And we're seeing those come in as additional. Like I can tell you right now, like 30% of our inbound leads are now being sourced by LinkedIn directly in the last 2 months since I've started to incorporate this strategy with the team. That's massive.
Totally.
Right? Just humongous gains for us. So is it perfect? No. Are we doing everything right? Heck no. Is our ad creative the best? Nope. We're experimenting with things like, do some of the ads push to a Pathfactory experience on the back end? So like post click, we send them to a Pathfactory experience where the goal of that's like get you to consume as much content as possible. We're also testing carousel ads versus there's all these different things we're testing.
Yep.
But the thing that we've learned the most is LinkedIn definitely works. I don't care what, I've worked in a lot of different companies. I've tested LinkedIn on a lot of different companies. It works in IT. It works in cybersecurity. It definitely works for SaaS and tech, and obviously B2B marketing and sales. Even when I was in service businesses like Iron Mountain, records manager and stuff that don't seem like a well-known persona and a persona that would spend time, they're there too. They may not spend every day and every hour on it, but that strategy and those channels absolutely work. And we all spend time on it that's in some form or fashion. So very bullish on it. But those are some of the learnings we've had so far.
That's killer. So when you started out, it was a 50-50 split, it sounded like, between the insight-led ad creative versus the more lead focused, conversion event. Have you adjusted that over the course of this time as well? Or is it still kind of 50-50?
We're trying to get to 70-30 or 80-20, where 70% of those ads are like product overview and insight.
Yep.
And 20% are conversion. It's just, we have to build, we have to add that content, which is why these content pillars we talked about earlier become so critical. When we really started to launch our LinkedIn strategy about 3 months ago, while we had a bunch of content, it wasn't content that I and the team felt was all best for LinkedIn distribution necessarily, or, distributing via channel like LinkedIn. So we had to wait a little bit to get some of these insight-led content reports. And of course, once we launch this bi-weekly live event series, I am not too concerned about the content flywheel anymore. But so intentionally, by the way, some of the planning that we've done, it's like, how do we do this to feed everything else we're doing?
Yep.
But that was why it started. Probably it was more like a 50-50 split initially. It was about making sure we had the right content that could feed the different things. But now that we're creating more product tours, we have these insight-led reports. We'll have this bi-weekly live event series content soon. We're doing more customer interviews we're trying to refresh our case studies. Like I mentioned earlier, how do we do case studies that almost have a playbook tied to them? All this different stuff will help feed that 70 or 80-20 split going forward, where more of that content's value add,
right,
whether it's delivered via carousels or short videos and stuff, as opposed to hey, click this ebook and I'm going to gate it and put you into a nurture stream.
And with the 70 to 80, especially as it evolves to start adding, the live event series content and some of those other formats you described, what are you driving folks to with those? Are you even asking for a click, or is it just simply let's focus on getting them to consume that content in feed, and we know the consumption's there because we can track that, we can see the engagement, and that's the goal, simply. Hey, let's
Yeah.
drive everybody to just simply hit follow. Like, cause
Yeah. Great.
that's one thing as well.
It's a really good question. So we ongoing experimenting this
Yep.
with the resource that we use. But truthfully, I'd say it's probably not 50-50, but a percentage of our ads are focused purely on in-feed consumption.
Yep.
I think my man in Natividad from SparkToro credited as like zero click content.
Yep.
Huge fan of that, by the way, like ingenious simplification of it. But so we try to use carousel ads. Like we have some variations of our ads where we take like insights from the benchmark report and we share it via carousel. So even if you choose to never or don't want to leave LinkedIn, you're still getting some of that value in feed through, a couple clicks as a carousel. If we have like this soon to be launched event series, I might post a 2-minute ad that's a snippet of this interview that you and I are doing or whatever.
Yep.
And my goal is, I'll give you the option to go to a post-click experience, but even if you choose not to, I'm trying to give you a percentage of the content where you're going to get value in feed. All the assets, including the ones where my goal is to give you in feed, we do push everyone back to a Pathfactory experience. And the best way I could simplify Pathfactory experience is think of it as a dedicated landing page where we try to provide access to that resource and other resources that we believe are valuable based on the topic or the content bucket that you're engaging with at that time.
Yep.
So, for example, if you indicate that you're interested in Ford trucks, we'll send you a Pathfactory experience that talks about Ford Raptors and then every other version of a Ford variant truck and the value of Ford trucks. And maybe it's like truck overview versus Chevy or whatever, right? That is how we try to drive all of our LinkedIn experiences. Are we still experimenting with? Yeah. And like, depending on the content formats, like for video ads, we're looking at engagement time and consumption time. For carousel ads, we're looking at, again, engagement time and, the clicks, if you will.
Yep.
For all those ads, we're looking at how often they go to the Pathfactory experience or they click on that. So we're looking at all of that.
Yep.
But the metric I care about most right now is what percentage of those named accounts are actually engaging with the ads and how many of those ads. And like I said, I think earlier, we see about 30 to 40% of our accounts engaging with more than 3 of those ads at a time, which is very encouraging for us.
And it'll be cool too in the future, as you have some of the internal SMEs posting like monthly organic, like seeing which of those posts naturally take off and then turning those into thought leader ads, maybe like adjusting the copy a little bit in it or something, but like the organic to paid flow of like the audience is telling us they like this content, so we know that this is going to work well turning into paid.
Totally agree. I want to, I've talked to different people about this for what feels like years now. I've always had imposter syndrome with LinkedIn where it's like, I don't know what to post and I don't want to regurgitate what other people are talking about. So I've always personally struggled with it. But given that right now, at least at Pathfactory, I market to marketers, my goal is to try to become a little bit more consistent with what I post, but like sort of like that post I did a week or 2 ago, it's trying to provide value or at least lessons that we're learning and seeing as we go. Because ultimately my predominant audience is marketers, right? That's just who I'm mostly connected with. So even for me, it's an ongoing journey. But what I have found is if you're sitting here, listening to this and at least you're going through that same kind of debate as I am, what I have found to be most beneficial when I post is either content where I share learnings and things that I'm experiencing or going through with the team, or content that either I have found helpful or I'm just re-referencing it or sharing it. Those 2 things have worked exceptionally well for me. And then the third is like, if I see you, Erik, and Dave Gerhardt and other people talking about topic X, and then I might share my point of view based on a comment I left, etc. That is like the third bucket that I found very valuable. So like for me, when I'm looking at content iteration, I'm trying to keep it in those 3 buckets. That's where I've had a lot of engagement. When I try to deter away from that is where it gets pretty muddied pretty fast.
Yeah, the first person stories, like lens of like, this is what I am doing or we are doing versus like, this is what you should do. Definitely seems for me as well. And just from studying others seems to be a really strong, compelling, because it's authentic and it's a little less preachy. It's more just like, hey, here's what I've done, here's what we did. Like maybe it's helpful to you versus like, here's the prescriptive thing you should do that I'm kind of like preaching to you.
And that's part of why I wanted to, like, when I was conceptualizing wanting to do this event series with the team, what I initially said, when the team and I were brainstorming, was I don't want another like interview style approach. I think there's enough of that. And I'll just pick on, like, I don't need to hear about Nick and Nick's life story. And I'm just randomly using the word name Nick. Like, it's sort of tired. No offense. It's not for me anymore. Instead, like, I want to be able to put out content, to your point, that's insight led. How do I, if we're trying to market to that 95%, it's how do I teach them mistakes that people have made or learnings? Like, I don't think people talk enough about their growth and the things. Like, all we see is Eric's got 100,000 followers and he's killing it. And then I look, it's sort of like you see somebody who's super fit and in really good physical shape. And you and I might wake up and we're a little bit overweight. And it's like, okay, I want that. But then you start that journey, as you probably know, if you ever start working out and you haven't worked out in a long time, you're after one workout, your body feels like it's going to break. And then you start the diet and you've been dieting for like a week and you look at the scale, you look at your body composition, you're like, I haven't really made progress. And it can be easy to give up. I kind of look at all of this the same way, which is our approach has been, I have made more mistakes than I care to admit. Like, we should have a series where we just, or maybe another one of these where we talk about even our LinkedIn ad strategy. We put out ads that have been awful, missed the mark. That's okay. Like I say to the team, like, mistakes or content we produce that doesn't land, or we put on this biweekly live event series and for the first handful, no one attends. Eric, I don't consider that a failure. The key is going to be like, what have we learned from it? What's audience feedback? If we start distributing that content and we're getting positive feedback, like, okay, maybe we have to rethink the approach, but there's still value in the things that we're doing. And even if that value is learning what to do or not do in the future. So it's my mindset of how I'm approaching things, but it's been a long trial and error, right? Like, running the lead playbook for a decade and a half, which I'm definitely guilty of doing, and then shifting to this one where, like, I'm waiting for people to come to me and raise their hand, inbound leads and pipeline creation and looking to see where inbound, that is a massive shift. Um, but what I've found is committing and doing those things right, the value of those leads, the quality of those leads, and the insight you get from your reps and what, like, the sales team feeds to me, you it's worth more than hitting like a arbitrary MQL goal, truthfully.
I think it's a really fun time to be in content right now. Because we have more tools in terms of platforms, but we also have the consumer's attention and their consumption habits now match those tools and platforms as well. And there's a lot of companies that haven't adapted. So there's a moment in time now where like the competitive environment, especially in B2B, is not that competitive, even in a category like marketing to marketers. To be honest, like if you go to YouTube and you type in B2B marketing, you're not going to find that much stuff yet. But if you type in like direct to consumer or like creators or other stuff like that, or like just social media like related content in general, like you're going to find a lot of stuff. But B2B marketing, you're not going to find that
Yeah,
much.
totally.
And so, yeah, I guess we could kind of wrap, because this has been amazing. Like with that in mind, what is there anything else that like you're excited about just with the future of, this new wave of B2B content marketing?
I think the way we deliver content is what I'm most excited about, and it's where I get my most inspiration from. So, for example, Recorded Future, which is a threat and cybersecurity company, they have in essence, like a journalist arm of their company where they produce media coverage called The Record. And I mean, I've worked in IT infrastructure in the past, so it's a brand I've been familiar with for a while. But they, in essence, they brought in, like, in essence, two legacy journalists in that space whose sole job is to find and research all the emerging trends and cyber threats and actual incidents that occur in the IT world. And then they became a centralized resource to summarize, report, and provide that information to prospects and customers.
Super smart.
That is genius. Now, obviously, that's a big bet. I'm sure in the beginning, it took time to get the readership and the engagement that have no doubt that they're getting today. I mean, I even see them cited and referenced and linked to in different, like, that's an example of, I think there are endless creative, unique ways to be able to take what we're talking about, but think about the formats and the distribution, how you can approach it that allows you to stand out. Like, we talked a lot today about LinkedIn and our pillars and how we're using LinkedIn as a distribution channel. But like, what the record is ingenious, and all the legs that can feed, amazing. Another brand, Nevadic, I think I mentioned earlier, Natalie, she takes product tours, and when they do their customer newsletter every month, they actually break down examples of how customers using tours using their own product. So, like, they walk you through a tour experience of, like, here's a website that's set up great, and it's like, I just think that's awesome, like, in a great use of your own. So, but that's just unique creative ways of content delivery, in some cases using your product or things like that. One last thing I'd say is I'm very bullish. You mentioned YouTube. YouTube is a channel that I'm enamored with. Obviously, I follow a lot of individual creators. I probably consume more content on YouTube than I do like TV or anything. I have yet to find a B2B brand that I think has, like, nailed YouTube. That is what I'm, like, secretly studying and trying to figure out. I definitely watch way too many Mr. Beast content just because I feel like he studied the algorithm and has mastered it. I mean, he's the
Yep.
biggest YouTuber on earth. But that is a channel that we're not focused there right now. We're not ready for it. But I would love to figure out YouTube in the future. I think it's just that channel, and the potential of that channel is just humongous.
And it's a massive discovery platform. It's got that as search baked into it. It's got subscriber and followership similar to podcasting. Like, it kind of has a little bit of everything. But yeah, I'm excited for that then. So let's
Yeah,
keep an eye.
it's an
I'll encourage
interesting.
everybody to, check in 12 months. Go check the Pathfactory YouTube channel. We'll see what's transpired. But Pete, this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate it. I'm inspired by how you think about this. Obviously, you all have a platform with Pathfactory that can help with a lot of this. So I'll encourage everybody to go check that out. I know you're on LinkedIn and you're posting frequently there. Anywhere else you want to point people to, or like anything else other than that?
No, just LinkedIn's probably the best place. Feel free to DM me. I'm happy. I do meetings all the time. I just try to connect with people and learn. But yeah.
Love it.